Good morning. My name is Chris Waugh. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Sutter Health, looking after about 3.5 million patients here in Northern California. And I have the honor today of both thanking the Healthcare Track team, who's behind the scenes today, bringing a lot of the content that you're seeing to life. But more importantly, I get the honor of introducing the next fireside chat. Coming up, you're going to hear an explosive conversation at the intersection of life sciences and technology. And the person that you'll be hearing from is Joydeep Ganguly. He's the Senior Vice President of Operations at Gilead Sciences. He runs corporate engineering and operations, infrastructure, capital planning, sustainability, risk management, resilience, global procurement, and 8 million square feet of office space. As he put it in his words, it's everything that the scientists don't want to do. He's got under his jurisdiction. We were just talking behind the scenes about everything that happened during the pandemic. And as we've observed as leaders, you know who the true leaders are, especially those that were involved in life sciences through the pandemic. And we've also seen what some of the possibilities are in terms of advancements in technology and biosciences in a very short amount of time. So he'll be joined by Mohan, an old friend of mine. He's the founder of LeanTaaS. Everything that is relevant in technology as it manifests in a patient life, you can see at LeanTaaS. Software meeting AI and algorithms that allow for optimization in patient data. So I'd like to welcome my new friend, Joydeep, and my old friend Mohan to the stage for an interesting conversation about bio-life sciences and technology. Thanks so much.
Hi, Joydeep. Good to be here.
Great to be here as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for making time today. So tell us a little bit about Gilead Life Sciences and your area of responsibility.
So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. So for those folks that don't know, Gilead's one of the oldest biotechnology companies. We've got a mission to create a healthier world for everyone. We are most well known for our work in the HIV space. We were also one of the first companies that cured a disease state. We cured Hep C with our work on Sovaldi and Harvoni. And we've got a tri-focus right now around virology, oncology, inflammation. We're based out of Foster City. We call California a home. We like to think of ourselves as the largest startup in the world. We're 19,000 people, so we have to sometimes let our folks know that we're not a startup, we're actually a big company. Within the company, I manage operations. Chris has already done a good job with my bio, but I also have a dual role. I sit on the board of our Gilead Foundation, which is one of my favorite things, where we actually also spend a lot of time trying to ensure that what we do is also not just good for our patients and our shareholders, but also our communities.
Gilead's committed to a very ambitious agenda in the area of environmental, social, and governance. Tell us a bit more about that commitment.
I really appreciate you asking me, and I really hope that my response, I actually do hope it comes across as a bit provocative. We have committed, much like other companies, to an ambitious ESG goal. I'll start off by stating that we don't see ESG as purely a social construct. We see it as a business construct. If our CEO has a saying that one of the visions he has about the company is that we will continue to do well by doing good. And then actually I believe there's a causality here in terms of doing good. So our ESG focus is threefold. We focus very heavily on innovating for unmet medical needs. We focus very heavily on empowering people and communities, and we focus very heavily on ensuring that we have sustainability and we take care of our shared planet. Within the innovating unmet medical needs, and it's very easy to be an ESG company when you've got a patient at the end of your supply chain. But within that, we have a relentless focus on things like cure, right? We believe that we should dream the impossible. We should focus on making our therapies more easily accessible. We also have a big mission around ensuring that the way our trials are designed reflect the diversity of our patient population. There's a there's a big component of ensuring that the voices of our Black community, our Hispanic community, our LGBTQ plus community, they shape the way our trials are designed, and they are not an afterthought in the overall sort of clinical trial ecosystem. Within the social side, and you talk about the community, Anita talked so eloquently about the power of diversity. You're not exploiting the full value of innovation if there is just one sector disproportionately benefiting from the ecosystem. So, being vocal about things and topics like representation of women in leadership, representation of Blacks on leadership teams, how much of our board is diverse. And that's something that we take super seriously. And then finally, on the shared planet stuff, it's a passion of mine personally because of the role I occupy. But we've got an ambitious net zero goal, where I think we're focused a little bit more is to try and convert the pledge into action. We've had a series of pledges, and we've almost gone pledge crazy, where everyone's making a pledge that we're going here with a 2030, 2040 timeline. This is the decade of action. This is the year of action. And I think where Gilead's really focused on is both trying to make ESG not just a social construct, but a business construct, and then use it as a way to inspire, attract the next generation of leaders to come and work in this space.
You talked exactly about that, which is everyone sets pledges for 2030 and 2040, and the pledges seem very big, but the tangible impact that's measurable doesn't quite catch up to the pledges across the board. So how is Gilead different in this area? What do you do to ensure that the impact is both tangible and measurable?
That's a great question, right? So our pledge, I'll take one pledge. Our one pledge is net zero by 2030 on the environment side. There are three things that we really focus on, right? One is there's a very overt capital allocation strategy on everything, right? We're investing heavily in climate tech. We're investing heavily in property technologies that enable our focus on renewables and utilization. We influence policy quite a bit, right? Our entire thing is around, what are the policies that support electrification of our assets? And as a result of which, and I don't think, I'm not nervous stating this, we actually have a goal of not just achieving net zero by 2030, but actually way before that, because it is important that these pledges do get converted to action. And I think our commitment towards putting dollars and capital into this process to inform policy and then to talk about it. I mean, what we're doing today is trying to ensure that discussions around ESG aren't just viewed as woke environmental activism, right? There's a case. I mean, I'll tell you right now. I interviewed 15 to 20 people a year. The next generation, when you ask them, what questions do you have for us? They're not asking us about their grants or their RSUs or when am I going to be a manager. They're asking about the soul of the company. They're asking us about the meaning. They're asking us about purpose. And there is a huge, huge differentiated advantage for companies that actually pursue this as part of their fabric versus those that pursue it as a hobby right now. Because I do believe the pressure around making sure that we are responsible in the way we grow is super important. And the role that climate tech technologies, AI, everything plays into this is huge.
That's interesting that you shape the soul of the company along these objectives. If you get specific, capital allocation is a leading indicator of how a company sets its priorities because it's putting its money where its mouth is, if you will. So can you talk about capital allocation and how you think about it in the Gilead Life Sciences concept?
Yeah, it's another great question. I mean, we tend to think of I manage the company's capital project portfolio, and we think of our capital expenditures are in areas like buildings and operations and information technology. And a few years ago, we were like, so how much are we truly spending on sustainability, and why wouldn't we be proud about it in terms of our sustainability investments? And we made a conscious decision to actually have a line item in our capital budgets around sustainability technology investments we make. Be it in terms of electrifying our fleets, be it in terms of renewables, be it in terms of investing in a suite of technologies that allow you to better manage your assets. And again, I think what might be surprising to people is the high rate of return we get on those investments. It's not viewed as, oh, we're not doing it so that we get a wonderful media soundbite that we are net zero. The rate of return on those investments is huge. The study, we hopefully will get the complete data next year, but I'm actually retrospectively looking at the last 100 capital projects in my portfolio. There's also a direct correlation with how sustainable that asset was and how right first time, how efficient, how much life cycle management benefits we received. And it makes sense because when you actually think about it, when you engage people in sustainable design, you by default are forcing yourself to be a lot more thoughtful. You're forcing yourself to adopt technologies that actually give you that life cycle benefit. So while the capital upfront is viewed as a big reason why you wouldn't pursue it, if you look down the line, there's very little that's been published about the business case of ESG and environmental investments and capital investments in this. And one of the things that we are actually looking to do right now is also look at startups that are doing some fabulous stuff in the space and see if we can co-create some technologies that we can put into our infrastructure.
But that requires you to take a total life cycle cost rather than an immediate ROI on capital. And so that's kind of how you think about it.
100%. I mean, you can't approach this with a myopic viewpoint. And this is where probably being in a biotech sector where, if you want instant gratification, this is the wrong business to be in, right? Unfortunately, it's. I wish we could just, everyone conjures medicines and biotech as being anchored around mercurial aha ideas, and there are some mercurial aha ideas. I don't want to diminish the importance, but it's heavy lifting. It's good science. It's good mechanistic understanding. It's trial. It's experimentation. It's failure and learning from that failure. So I think that muscle around being okay with a longer term view, and we see our investments in ESG as well as everything in this space as long term views. If you're looking for a short term return, you will be disappointed, right? If you're looking at a long term view, both in terms of the tangible stuff, the economics associated with this, as well as the intangibles, the cultural impact, the meaning, the purpose, everything with what you can do to bring the workforce more intrinsically tied to your mission. They are long-term plays right now, and I think you have to take that view around that. What you do have to do, however, in the long term is ensure that you're dealing in numbers, right? So I think the way to lose credibility here is to make the pledges, make the promises, make the investments, and don't go back. And that's one of the reasons we spend a lot of time also retrospectively looking at making sure that we invest not just in the right spaces, but with the right companies in this area to get the rate of return.
Let's talk about innovation for a moment. Innovation in healthcare is challenging. Healthcare is somewhat conservative, and in some ways I'm grateful for that. I'm happy that the surgeon operating on me is not using a scalpel that he found on Amazon. So that's probably a good thing. But how do you think about innovation and disruption in such a challenging environment?
So that's a fabulous question. The entire healthcare industry is, there's a Latin saying, I'll get the Latin saying wrong, but I can translate it. We're so indexed on this thing around do no harm. That is the overriding. That's why doctors don't operate with Amazon scalpels. And that's why we over-index on a very conservative approach around safety, etc. And that, I think, is core to our mission. Unfortunately, one of the byproducts of that do no harm philosophy is that we are very comfortable with status quo. I joke in my area, operations, the most overriding system is called change control. We control change. Any change requires a lot of testing, and that sort of leads itself into, when taken in an extreme fashion, it becomes a deterrent to innovation. But when I think of innovation, I don't think of it just purely in terms of technology, business processes, etc. I think of the culture of innovation, and I'll just give a couple of examples at Gilead, and we certainly don't have a purchase on innovation. There's every company. It starts off with, why are you innovating, right? And that's why the first line in our ESG report isn't net zero. It isn't just a pure diversity play. It is innovating in the areas of unmet medical needs. And you anchor it to the patient. You anchor it to humanity. You anchor it to that entire the value chain. I'll give a great example. In the pandemic, first of all, it's great to see everyone in person. But 3 years ago, we were told we need to shut down. And when you think of innovation in the biotech industry, we're very high in innovation in the molecule side in the labs. We were not lucky, we had a molecule called remdesivir, which became Veklury, that had the potential to be one of the first therapies to offer some hope. In a year where we were honestly looking for some hope right now. But in the middle of the pandemic, it required our scientists to manipulate the virus on campus. Now, I run operations, I also run environmental health and safety, and my number one goal was to get people away from the virus on campus. And I'm getting calls from my researchers saying we need to get the virus on campus to manipulate it and play with it so we can determine whether the therapy can actually have any activity. And that was an interesting conversation I had, by the way, is how do I get a virus on campus and then create the infrastructure to ensure that people are safe, people that are working on it is safe. And we had this phenomenal entrepreneurial engineer, and again, this innovation is in my shop, and I'll speak to this, there's a ton of innovation that went around that, who created this incredible containment technology, and he fabricated it himself. Literally, if you can imagine Back to the Future, building the DeLorean and trying to get that lightning tower, this was that right now. And it felt really good, by the way. I'm an engineer by education. I felt in the last 15 years, I haven't been doing much engineering, and that was the first time we were actually building some stuff. We were creating some stuff, and obviously there was a sense of euphoria around. There was a sense of the butterflies in the stomach because it was a pandemic, and everyone was galvanizing around it. Long story short, that lab that they fabricated in his garage was shipped to the site, and we built a BSL-3 containment lab, and the virus could come on Gilead campus. We manipulated it. It turned out it had activity. Our trials were done in record speed. We had the data, then we made it, and then I think I've never seen cases where in less than a year we went from a molecule sitting on our shelf to it being available. And I know we talk a lot about the deterrence to innovation, but if there's a way to package that example and scale it, it would be a much better world. And so when you ask me the question of innovation, I often find myself going back to the culture of innovation within the company. And as a leader, and I know our CEO does the same thing, we focus a lot on, do we have the right incentives? Are we creating an ecosystem where people are okay to fail? People are okay to experiment? In every area, right? When scientists work on stuff, they have a notion that not everything will succeed. In operations, not so much. This relentless pursuit of perfection is stymieing the ability for us to innovate in key areas, and as a result of which the lack of investment in innovation translates into waste that we pass on. So I've given you a much longer answer, and this is, I'm hearing myself speak and sort of almost get preachy over here, but when it comes to innovation, and I feel it very appropriate being at this conference that is anchored on innovation, that my encouragement to everyone would be that biotech and the pharma industry is thirsting for that. And I think if we can find a way to intersect the technology, the process with that culture, in the end, it'll be patients and humanity that'll benefit.
That's a pretty amazing story. So fabricating a containment facility in the garage, how long did it take from molecule on the shelf to drugs in a patient?
I might get the number wrong, but it was literally warp speed. And I know the operation was called warp speed, but March 2020 is when we began this work, and I forget the exact timeline, but it was less than a year, I think, from the time we did this.
Amazing.
And it was a lot of people. It wasn't just, my group had a very small role in terms of getting the fabrication, the technology there. But there was the external manufacturing group that had to work with our network of partners because we had to make the molecule. Then we had to do trials, and we had to get the data, we had to publish it, we had to file it. And don't forget, we had to do this when the dominant work model was work from home. And even just getting people back on campus required a level of scientific intimacy with risk that we weren't used to dealing with. And honestly, we were making stuff on the fly. But what I will say is, in in my 20 years of working in the industry, I haven't seen a time, if there's one good thing that came out of the pandemic, is I haven't seen a time where collaboration models were so respected and so changed. We moved from everything that we viewed as transactional to a strategic model. Partners were calling us up and saying, how can we help? No one was looking at what's the contract, what's the per batch pricing, we did the MSAs, we did all the contracts. But that was a moment in time where everybody was like, we dealt with kindness, care, compassion as currency, and as a result of which, innovation became the default standard.
That's
and
amazing.
people weren't asking us what can go wrong. They were like, well, if it's a shot, we're taking it, and what do we need?
That's fabulous. Let's switch gears a minute. AI has always been a hot topic. With ChatGPT in recent months, it's generated an enormous amount of buzz. Some excited about the potential, some terrified about the consequences. How do you think about AI and ChatGPT in your work?
That's a fabulous question. This is the only question I'm nervous about because I'm speaking to a bunch of people that probably have years and decades more domain expertise in this area. But I'll give you a general view on disruptive technologies and the way I see it. And I'll provide the perspective of being a part of the healthcare ecosystem. We see this as having tremendous potential because anything that can fundamentally alter a business process and create and unleash capacity and productivity is by default an accelerator, right? And when I step back and say, are there things I do on a daily basis that could be replaced and to a more efficient standard, eventually all that will translate into patients seeing drugs quicker, right? So there is that holy grail around that inefficiency construct that can be rethought. Now it has to be handled in a responsible manner. It has to be managed by organizations and people that understand both the upside, the downside, and sides we aren't seeing yet. But that could be said about every technology. It's no different, and maybe because we are in the biotech sector, we are comfortable dealing with things that are a bit nebulous. Every drug we try has a certain degree of alchemy, right? If someone told me 10 years ago we were doing gene therapy, we were doing cell therapy, we were actually taking people's own cells and doing apheresis and then transplanting it back there, and you could potentially cure cancer. CRISPR, right? I mean, you talk about the technologies there. Those were things that were considered science fiction, and because our space is one that's characterized by trying to take science fiction and make it reality, we are okay with the unknown. But like everything else, and this is actually a quote I'll attribute to you. I mean, you mentioned while we were waiting that everything has a downside. Fire has a downside. Without fire, we couldn't do what you do. So I think there's tremendous potential, but I think the role of standards, the role of systems, the role of managing expectations around the potential and the power is important. I'll end this question on a personal note, right? I come from a very small family, and my mom's in India, and she's a widow. Unfortunately, lost my dad at a very young age, who was a very famous heart surgeon in India. But my mom suffers from RA, which rendered her immobile for 10 years. So the last 10 to 12 years, she hasn't been able to walk. And I remember when my father passed away, my brother and my brother is also in San Francisco. He's a partner at PwC, and we were both like, one of us has to go back home. And mom can't be alone, right? She can't walk. It was around the cusp where voice-activated technologies was taking off. And I remember my mom saying, don't worry about it, we'll just take that. We've been there. And now if you look at a bedroom, right, she's like a 62-year-old Bengali mom who's like a firebrand of a mom. Right? She still, scolds us and this and that. But her entire room is like a Star Trek Enterprise, right? It's got every voice-activated technology, so everything from groceries to medicines to her regime, to her infusions, to what channels she watches. And it is amazing to see the role technology had, and we don't see all that technology as being on the downside. We see it as giving my mother a chance at a life that she wouldn't have had 10 years ago. And this is super personal, and it's an N of one example. But if you can do that, and you can give hope to a 62-year-old Bengali woman in Calcutta who feels that she is sorted, And she is actually looking forward to what ChatGPT can do for her now, right? Which is strange, right? Because, but she is like, technology has given her at a lease in life that till date, medicine hasn't, right? And I'm in the industry, right? We're working on inflam cures, we're working on RA cures. The cures, the therapies right now are debilitating. So as you go back and as you think about your works and as you think about the role you play, there's an extraordinary contribution you make to way of life that I think transcends everything we've talked about.
Wow, that's a remarkably inspiring and personal story. Thanks for sharing that. Let's switch gears again. Workforce is a hot topic, particularly in healthcare, with nursing shortages, physician burnout, etc. At Gilead, how do you think about the workforce of the future, and what are you doing to prepare for that?
Yeah, it's the war for talent is absolutely real, right? So as we think of the workforce of the future, the first thing we're doing is we've got our HR programs that every company has in terms of talent acquisition and recruitment. There are three big macro trends we are seeing. One is the workforce of the future is far more sorted than the workforce that at least in my generation, right? I talked about the questions that we often get asked in interviews, but they're very, very selective about organizations they want to be part of. And again, it goes back to the meaning, purpose, and soul, but it's also about impact, right? They want to see the impact of what they do at a much greater scale than I did when I started working. The second aspect is that digital revolution everyone talks about is absolutely real. In operations, often I have to provide support to new employees that come in, etc. And their fundamental expectations in terms of their workspace and how it makes them feel and productive, etc., is very, very important. And the reason I bring this up is there's an entire ecosystem of things we can do to enable the workforce of the future to succeed that we're not doing today. We still think of, there's, the most common topic is return to site. How many people are remote? How many people are not? And the arguments the discussions we're having at Gilead aren't about real estate economics and whether we can dispose of land. The questions that our CEO is asking of us is, what workforce and what workspace and return to site construct will maximize inspiring the workforce of the future? Will they feel more inspired when they come into our labs and feel the science? Will they feel more inspired when they walk into our hallways and see Nobel laureates that informed a lot of our work? And that's important right now. So I think the way we think of the workforce of the future is grounded a lot in that ecosystem that we need. And finally, I think what we're also, and this is Anita's line and not mine, is diversity and inclusion and belonging are huge components of the workforce of the future. We have disproportionately focused on certain sectors within our workforce, and Buffett said the best that I've only competed with 50% of the world's population, right? Once people get that in their head that there's an entire innovation engine that hasn't been invested in, is important. So we think of workforce of the future in those sort of tranches.
Great. Joydeep, as a closing thought, we've got a room full of new entrepreneurs. What advice would you have for them?
So very little by way of advice, but first of all, I'll start off with a thank you. Entrepreneurship is hard, right? As a part of a big company, I just will tell you this. I shared one personal story about my mom. It takes bravery, it takes courage, it takes conviction. So a gigantic thank you. What you all are doing today is going to shape things that will impact the world tomorrow. And that courage and the conviction and the risk and is admirable, right? So I'll start off with a thank you, right? As a current and a future beneficiary of the work you all are doing. And I think the second thing is to continue to get inspiration from meetings like these. I was just in the green room looking and seeing people talk and connect, etc. There's some great solidarity in trying to approach entrepreneurship as a community. You don't have to go it alone. And I think continuing to look at this as a collective sort of community that drives a common mission forward is the only advice we give. And that's actually a piece of advice I'm taking seriously myself. Even in the biotech industry, we tend to think of ourselves as very isolated. Gilead has to be this. And I think we're sort of pausing and let's learn from other companies. Let's learn from how things work, because we are far more powerful in the collective. So just those two pieces of thoughts.
Joydeep, thank you for your time. Thoughts were very